When my divorced landlady teased me about unpaid rent, I joked about paying in kisses. I never expected her smile that night would change everything between us. It was late evening when I climbed the narrow stairs to my apartment, the hallway washed in a golden glow from the lights overhead. At the far end, my landlady's door was open, a warm strip of light spilling into the otherwise quiet space. She stood there, leaning against the frame with the kind of effortless poise that always seemed to surround her. Her loose cardigan hung just off one shoulder, her dark hair tied back but with a few strands falling forward, framing her face in a way that made her look softer, less guarded. When she caught sight of me, her lips curved into a half-smile, not playful yet not entirely stern either. "Your rent isn't paid yet," she said, her tone steady, almost businesslike, though her eyes carried something more subtle, like she was testing the ground. I stopped mid-step, pretending to look guilty as I shifted the envelope in my hand. Something about the way she watched me, calm, composed, yet faintly amused, made my chest tighten with an odd mix of nervousness and warmth. Before I could think better of it, I replied lightly, "Want me to pay in kisses instead?" The words hung between us, bold but playful. For a moment, I thought she might laugh outright, dismiss it as the careless remark of someone too young to know when to stop joking. But she didn't. Her smile deepened, slow and knowing, and though she tilted her head with a touch of mock disbelief, her eyes betrayed a flicker of vulnerability, as if the idea brushed against a part of her she rarely let surface. She extended her hand, waiting for the envelope, and when I placed it there, her fingers lingered just a heartbeat longer than necessary, brushing against my own. That tiny touch was enough to send a quiet ripple through me, warm, electric, impossible to ignore. "You're too cheeky for your own good," she finally murmured, but her voice held none of the sharpness her words implied. Instead, it was soft, like she was letting me glimpse a side of her usually kept hidden. As I turned to unlock my door, I could still feel her gaze on my back, and when I glanced once more over my shoulder, she hadn't moved. She stood there with the envelope in hand, smiling faintly to herself, as though my foolish little joke had left a mark deeper than either of us cared to admit. That was the first spark, the moment when something playful revealed itself as something far more fragile, far more dangerous. The next evening, she invited me inside for tea. At first, I thought it was just a polite gesture, maybe even her way of keeping things strictly professional after my reckless joke. But when I stepped into her apartment, the atmosphere told me otherwise. Her living room was tidy, yet not in the impersonal way of someone showing off for guests. It carried the quiet signs of solitude, books stacked beside the armchair, a half-finished puzzle on the coffee table, and a pair of wine glasses drying upside down near the sink. The faint scent of chamomile and something faintly floral hung in the air. "Sit down," she said, moving gracefully toward the kitchen counter. She poured steaming tea into porcelain cups, and when she handed mine to me, her fingers brushed my knuckles, light but deliberate. The touch lingered, just long enough to make me aware of how carefully she held herself around me. I tried to break the tension with a joke, some throwaway line about her apartment feeling too refined for someone like me. She laughed, softly at first, then with a warmth that filled the room. But almost as soon as the laughter faded, her expression dimmed, as though the joy had slipped through her fingers. She settled on the couch across from me, her posture straight but her eyes restless, like she couldn't quite decide if she wanted to look at me or the floor. I noticed how her knees brushed close to mine, separated by only the narrow space between us. "It's been quiet around here lately," she said finally, her voice measured, carrying a weight that didn't need to be explained. She didn't say the word divorce, but I could feel it lingering unsaid in the room. "Some nights I don't even bother cooking. Tea's easier." Her gaze flicked up to mine then, and for a moment, I saw it, the loneliness she usually kept tucked neatly behind her confident smile. It wasn't dramatic or desperate. It was quieter, more human, the kind of ache that comes from long evenings where silence feels heavier than it should. I didn't push her for details. Instead, I sipped my tea, letting the warmth steady me, and offered her my presence the only way I knew how, by listening, by meeting her eyes when she dared to hold mine. And in that silence, with nothing but the clink of cups and the soft hum of the fridge in the background, something unspoken began to form between us. It wasn't about rent anymore. It was about the space she was letting me into, a space most people never saw. A few nights later, the sky opened up in one of those sudden downpours that seemed to wash the world clean. The rain came in heavy sheets, striking the balcony railings and windows with a steady rhythm. I had just settled in with a book when there was a knock at my door. She stood there, cardigan sleeves pulled tight around her arms, strands of hair already damp from the brief walk across the hall. "Could you help me with the balcony windows?" she asked. "They keep sticking, and I don't want the rain soaking in." I followed her into her apartment, the scent of rain mixing with the faint warmth of her home. The balcony doors rattled under the pressure of the storm, droplets already splattering through the small gap. I placed my hands against the frame, tugging hard until it finally gave way with a groan. She stepped beside me, her hand brushing my arm as she leaned in to pull her side shut. For a moment, we stood shoulder to shoulder, the world outside muffled by the pounding rain, leaving only the sound of our breathing in the close space. Her sleeve brushed mine, damp and cool, and without thinking I reached out, brushing away the droplets clinging to the fabric. My fingertips lingered just a second longer than necessary, drawn not by the water but by the quiet nearness of her presence. She glanced at me then, not startled but searching, as though weighing whether to step back or stay close. Her lips curved in a faint smile, the kind that seemed to say she noticed everything, even the things I didn't intend to show. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice softer now, almost lost beneath the patter of rain. I nodded, unsure if I trusted my voice not to betray the rush of warmth that had spread through me. The air between us felt different, charged, yet fragile, like a line we both hovered near without crossing. She didn't move away immediately. Instead, she rested her hand lightly against the frame, her shoulder still brushing mine as we looked out at the rain together. For those few minutes, the storm outside became a backdrop, a curtain that sealed us into a world of muted light and quiet tension. It wasn't just about fixing a window anymore. It was about the way her presence filled the small space, about the silence that felt anything but empty. Something was shifting, something subtle but undeniable. And as I left her apartment that night, the sound of the storm still echoing in my ears, I realized the boundaries between us were no longer so clear. It happened late one evening, long after most of the building had gone quiet. I had been returning from a late shift when I noticed the soft glow spilling from her living room window. As I passed her door, it creaked open, and there she was, hair down, cardigan draped loosely, a half-empty glass of wine in her hand. "You're just getting home?" she asked, her tone gentle, almost relieved at the interruption. "Yeah. Long day." I hesitated, then smiled. "You look like you could use some company." She tilted her head, lips parting as though to refuse, but instead she stepped back, leaving the door open. "Come in, if you don't mind late-night conversations." Her living room was lit only by a single lamp, casting soft amber light across the sofa and the faint patterns of the rug. I sat at one end while she settled at the other, tucking her legs beneath her. The distance between us wasn't much, but it felt deliberate, as though she wasn't ready for closeness but didn't want space either. She swirled the wine in her glass, staring into it before speaking. "You know, starting over at my age isn't easy." Her voice carried no bitterness, only a tired honesty. "People tell you it's freedom, but most nights, it just feels like silence. Too much silence." I watched her carefully, every word pressing against something tender in me. She wasn't the confident, teasing landlady standing in a hallway anymore, she was a woman letting the cracks in her armor show. "I'm sorry," I murmured. "That sounds heavy." She glanced at me, eyes shimmering in the lamplight, then gave a small, self-conscious laugh. "I don't usually talk about this. It feels strange, letting someone see the mess behind the curtains." Without thinking, I reached out and placed my hand lightly over hers where it rested on the sofa. The warmth of her skin met mine, steady but trembling faintly beneath the surface. For a moment she didn't move, her eyes locked on our hands as if testing whether she could allow this. Then she exhaled, the tension in her shoulders softening, and she didn't pull away. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full, alive, carrying the weight of everything she wasn't saying. In that quiet, I realized something had shifted again. She had let me into the part of her life she usually kept hidden, and the simple act of her hand resting beneath mine felt more intimate than any kiss could have been. It was a Friday night when she knocked on my door, a bottle of wine in hand and a slightly nervous smile on her face. "I thought you might help me finish this," she said lightly, though the way her eyes searched mine hinted that she wanted more than just company over a drink. We sat on her sofa, the same one where we'd shared that late-night talk before. This time, the air felt lighter at first. The wine loosened our words, pulling easy laughter from both of us. She told me stories from years ago, road trips with friends, awkward first dates, the little rebellions she once thought were daring. Her laughter filled the room, unguarded and warm, the kind of laughter that made me forget everything else. But as the night went on, the silences between the laughter began to stretch. The music she had playing in the background slowed into softer, quieter songs. At one point, she leaned closer to show me a worn photo album, the leather edges frayed from years of use. Her perfume carried faintly with her movement, warm and subtle, wrapping around me like something familiar. When she turned the page, a loose strand of her hair slipped forward, brushing against my cheek. I didn't think, I just reached up gently, tucking it behind her ear. My fingers grazed her skin, and in that instant, the room seemed to still. She froze too, her eyes lifting to mine, suddenly serious, suddenly fragile. We were close. Too close to pretend it meant nothing. Her face hovered inches from mine, her breath soft and unsteady. I could feel the weight of everything unspoken pressing in, the long looks, the touches that lingered, the unacknowledged pull drawing us nearer. For a heartbeat, I thought she might let it happen. That she might lean forward and erase the last of the distance between us. My chest tightened with the possibility. But then, almost in a whisper, she broke the moment. "It's late." Her voice was careful, measured, though her eyes betrayed the storm beneath her calm. She closed the photo album, setting it aside like a barrier between us. I leaned back slowly, trying to mask the disappointment with a smile. "You're right. I should probably let you rest." She nodded, though she still hadn't moved away. And as I stood to leave, I caught the faintest flicker in her gaze, something that told me she had wanted it too. She was just too afraid to let it show. That night, I walked back to my apartment with my pulse still racing, knowing we had reached the edge of something neither of us could ignore much longer. The morning after our almost confession, I half expected things to return to the way they had been before, that careful balance of playful banter and polite distance. But when I saw her that afternoon, standing in the doorway with folded arms and that guarded smile, I realized something had shifted. She tried to make light of it. "About last night," she said, her voice carrying a practiced casualness. "I might have been a little silly. Too much wine, too many memories. Don't take it seriously." Her words were polished, but her eyes betrayed her. They didn't hold their usual steady calm. Instead, they flickered, restless, as though she couldn't quite meet mine. She gripped the edge of the doorway, fingers curling tight against the wood, like she needed something solid to hold on to. I should have let her retreat. I should have played along, laughed it off. But instead, the words rose before I could stop them. "It didn't feel silly to me." She froze. Her breath caught, and for a long moment she just stared at me, her expression caught somewhere between surprise and fear. The hallway felt impossibly quiet, the kind of silence that makes every heartbeat thunder louder in your chest. I stepped closer, slowly, careful not to push too hard. "I meant what I felt last night," I said softly. "Maybe I shouldn't have, maybe it's complicated. But it wasn't a game for me." Her lips parted, as though she wanted to argue, but no words came. Instead, her gaze searched mine, desperate, uncertain, yet drawn all the same. She seemed torn between the instinct to protect herself and the yearning to believe me. My hand found hers where it still gripped the doorframe. Gently, I covered it, my thumb brushing across her knuckles. She didn't pull away. If anything, her grip tightened beneath mine, a silent admission she couldn't voice. For a moment, her eyes closed, her shoulders lowering as though the fight had drained from her. When she opened them again, there was a rawness in her expression, the kind of honesty that doesn't come with words. Neither of us moved further, but the weight of what passed between us in that small, fragile space was undeniable. She had let me see the part of her that was terrified yet hopeful, and I had let her know I wasn't afraid of it. That was the moment the line between us finally cracked. Not crossed, not fully, just cracked, enough to make us both realize there was no going back. It was a quiet evening when everything finally came full circle. The storm had passed, the week's tension softened into the hum of crickets outside. Her kitchen light spilled warmly into the hallway as I stepped inside. She was already there, setting 2 mugs of tea on the counter, her cardigan draped loosely around her shoulders. When she looked up, her smile wasn't the guarded kind she wore to protect herself. It was softer, calmer, like she had stopped fighting something inside. "About that rent you owe," she said playfully, lifting one brow. The words were familiar, echoing the very first time we had teased about it. But this time, there was no wall behind them, no defense. Only an invitation. I stepped closer, the air between us heavy with everything we hadn't said, everything we had been circling around for weeks. My chest tightened as I leaned in, pressing the lightest kiss against her cheek. Her skin was warm, her breath catching in the brief pause that followed. Then another, on her forehead, gentle and reverent, the kind of kiss that said more than words could ever manage. I pulled back just enough to see her face, her eyes glistening not with tears but with something deeper, something that made my own heart stumble. She let out a breath that turned into a quiet laugh, shaking her head softly. "I think I prefer this kind of payment." Her voice was teasing, yes, but threaded with sincerity, as though admitting she wanted this as much as I did. This time, she closed the distance. Her arms slipped around my shoulders, pulling me into an embrace that was neither hurried nor hesitant. It was steady, grounding, like she was finally allowing herself to lean into someone else's presence. I wrapped my arms around her, one hand resting at the small of her back, the other brushing lightly against her hair. For a long while, we stood like that, the world outside irrelevant. No jokes, no rent, no fear of what it might mean tomorrow. Just the quiet truth of being held by someone who had once seemed untouchable, yet now felt achingly close. When she finally drew back, her forehead rested against mine. Her smile was small, private, meant only for me. And in that moment, I realized the playful spark we had started with wasn't just a passing flame. It had grown into something steady, something real. Something worth paying for, not in money, but in moments like this, where every touch carried the weight of what we both had been too afraid to admit until now. And in that moment, I knew, what started as a playful spark had become something real, something I couldn't imagine walking away from. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves slow burn romance. And if you want more stories like this, well, you know where to find me.